I have my camera at 12:30, so...
Okay. I'll be around. I'm either in the reception or there's a second. So I think.
Like 10 past 12, 12:40.
12:40, okay. In the reception?
Yeah, somewhere there.
And we'll go for it.
Yeah.
It's noisy.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Well, let's see what my camera says. I have to write it.
12:40 then, just put that inside.
Because I'm meeting at 12:30, so I just have to.
Okay, 12:40.
Yeah, thank you.
Deal. No problem.
I'm sorry I was a little tough, but it's a real big case for what I'm going to get from this organization or we keep them British. And you know what's going to happen next month? The Greek minister will demand for fights for past and every single fight that will come from every single understand how serious it is. And because I read the Greek law, the Greek law leaks at one point. It has to do with data protection. There are subtitle files, there are personal data, and we have also created the independent authority to protect the data and will be a big mess. So, what I was saying is not to make anything embarrassed. What I said is to help you understand what that the big problem started from Greece with the other government. So it's like a chain.
Understood. Yep. Will do. Thank you. Sure. Do too many things at the same time. No problem. You well? I survived, I think. Yeah, I'm okay. Bit busy, but yeah, good. I'm here till tomorrow morning. I'll be around. There's another section on matrix, I think, at 2 o'clock. So yeah, I'm here and about. I'll be either hanging around in one of the talks or in the reception.
You guys did raise an interesting point.
Did, yes.
Sport radar reports.
Yeah, my schedule is really
Yeah, I mean, look,
The only thing is, you can sport radar different.
yeah, I mean, this is the thing, you know, we can't force, you know, it's a bit like someone, and I don't want to sound stupid, but if someone buys a pencil from me, that guy can't make me use that pencil. And it seems, you know, it maybe sounds like a facetious parallel, but the point is we send the reports in good faith. What they decide to do with it, why they decide to do that, is obviously different for every organisation. And we hope, you know, that if they're spending the amount of money that they are, then our reports are doing it because they have an appetite and an interest in pursuing it. So our obligation to UEFA is questions about, you know, our obligations in Greece, right? I don't think we have any legal obligations in Greece because we're not providing anything to any Greek organisation. So I understood his question. Exactly. So, you know, even if you go up the chain with another link, it still doesn't come to us. So, but I do take his point, you know, that you're right, there is a risk that organisations sit on our reports. The question is, you know, the first question we always ask ourselves, or the first thing we're trying to be aware of, why they do that. I think Declan made a good point, which is some federations or some clubs are so, you know, have so much problems that actually going after them is a real threat to your own safety. So it's tricky. It's not simple. It's not easy to start an investigation or to launch a criminal investigation into clubs or leagues or individuals who have a lot of power and have a lot of quite dangerous. So and there's resource questions. And there's, you know, like Sarah said, how high is it on the priority? So there's a lot of reasons why they might not be able to do everything they want to do with our reports, or not everything that we would want them to do with our reports. But like I said, our obligation is to provide the reports. We do that. We let them know that we will support them as and when they do what they do with it. That's really all we can do. We can't force them. We can't, if we said, okay, we're going to give you the report. If you don't do anything in 10 days, we're going to tell the media. That's not going to work. That's a different policy that doesn't work. So we're trying to be respectful of investigations. We're trying to be respectful of them. We're trying to be respectful of law enforcement investigations. They often ask us not to talk about ongoing investigation or prejudice investigations. So we try and work with the stakeholders as they are. Would we like things to be different? Yeah, we'd love for more people to use our reports for the resources, the ambitions, the fearlessness, and all those things.
People say, well, we have radar, we're doing everything we can. We're not doing anything with the reports. It's just to keep the public happy.
Yeah.
Keep everything as it is.
Yeah, I mean, we are conscious of the danger of becoming a figure, and we try and make sure that the organisations we do work with aren't minded that way, and we have, we try and keep conversations about, what is holding you back? Do you need more evidence? Do you need more matches? Sometimes, a lot of the times, what happens is one match happens, and they'll say, we want a few more. We're going to build a bigger case, which is what happened with Australians. They wanted 6 to 8 matches to prove a concrete modus operandi. So sometimes that happens as well. So we try and hear their concerns of what is it you need to act upon your reports. And we're happy, we've given law enforcement training for free. We've provided evidence testing for free.
Police have been
Yeah, so it's not just even about money making out of this. We do these things for free, but it's a decision ultimately that comes down to us. We do all we can, but we can only do what we can. But I take your point that it's something we're sensitive to, it's something we're aware of. We try and support as much as we can.
okay.
Does that make sense?
It's a complicated field.
Sure.
We'll talk later.
Sure, man. You're on the cycling reports, were you? To be honest, we don't monitor cycling at all. We have no clients in cycling. To be honest, I don't know why that decision has been made. So yeah, we haven't got to that stage where I didn't even know if we've been talking to them. We tend not to. We do some basic risk assessments before we create a model, but we tend not to create a model before we know that there's at least some basic interest. We haven't had that so far, and in reality, there are other sports that we are adding to the kind of development list. And so don't quote me, but I'm not sure cycling's on there just yet. But that's I mean, if the cycling stakeholder came to us and said, we're concerned about this, can you develop a model regarding strategic service? Then I'm sure that would change everything, and we would fast track the development of the product. We do it. We've done it for esports, we've done it for ice hockey, loads of different sports, different markets. We are the experts in betting in those sports. We do 40 sports, so I'm sure we can develop a model if there was an appetite for it. But yeah, up to at this point, to talk about cycling, we as a company just don't know, to be honest. It could be rampant, it could be non-existent. Sorry, I can't be even proper assistance.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's no doubt that the NFL, American football is a sport. Everything else it's up here, and everything else is sort of down here.
We can usually when we talk to sports or competitions, we do risk assessments, like I mentioned, and they are relatively simple and relatively cheap, and they look at the formats and the structure of the sport, the betting markets, the susceptibilities, and it's not conclusive, but it gives a very good sense of how at risk certain competitions, certain countries, a sport is, and then from that a federation or a competition where he can go, actually, you know, now that we've got this risk assessment, it's probably worth following this up. Or they might go, actually, this is quite good, we're not at risk just yet, or we don't need to prioritize it.
To protect information is
Sure.
we do.
Probably move off stage.
Yeah, and I was wondering.
Hello, can I ask everybody to take a seat? We're going to start the next session. Okay, welcome to this session again about the Sports Governance Observer. I think some of you may get a little tired of seeing and hearing me all the time to talk about this, so I'd like to take somewhat a different angle and discuss with you, and I very much hope for your constructive input and your questions. And with these two distinguished guests to talk about what can we do about this situation. Before I start, I get a lot of questions about this report, but the question I get the most is where can we get it? So again, there is a voucher in your conference package. You can use that. You can go to the information desk and then they will give you one. And I would really advise you to do so. They put a lot of money in there. There are colors. It's printed nicely. So please do get it if you're interested. Okay, so what did we get from this Sport Governance Observer report? What I saw was that they are characterized by flawed institutional design. Just to give you a quick recap. Flawed institutional design, we know this because we have developed a benchmarking tool. We applied this tool. And these federations, they get a mean score together of 45%, which is low. So they do not have solid structures in place. That's bad news for them, because it means that they are currently in a legitimacy crisis. They struggle to provide effective governance. Stakeholders are questioning their legitimacy. Their internal workings are opaque. So if they continue like this, no doubt you will see that they may even perish, and that will create a lot of instability and disorder in international sports governance. And that's bad news for us. Yeah, we do not want that. We need international sports federations. We need them to work good. So it's in our both interests that they improve their internal workings, that they make them more robust. How will they do this? Well, there is a need for change. And today I want to discuss with you how can we improve sports governance? What actors can improve? Which actors can make sure that we move into the right direction? Which actors can put a little pressure on these organizations? Who will do something about this? And therefore, I'm very happy and honored to have two distinguished guests here in this panel. Two organizations, according to me, that may hold the key towards change in international sports governance. I'll explain that a little later on, but I'd like to introduce them to you already at this point. It's Mr. Stanislas Frossard, Executive Secretary of EPAS, a large partial agreement for sports of the Council of Europe, and Mr. George Paterson, working at the EU Sport Unit. EU Sport Unit coordinates the activities of the European Union on sport, and from my understanding, he is the one occupied with good governance in the European Commission. So, who better to have here in our panel than this man? Allow me to give you a brief introduction. What is the problem in international sports governance? Why do we have this situation of bad governance? Well, I think this situation is the end result of decades of large, exceptionally large autonomy, and most importantly, a lack of external accountability. And there are a number of reasons for this. First of all, we have the international context. You can compare international sports federations with multinationals operating at a global level. You will notice that quite often you see that these multinational companies, they cannot be controlled. Is there a, oh yeah, can we have the image here? Okay. So you will see that we cannot control international, multinational companies. That's the same for international sports federations. They operate at a global level, so they can pick as a home base any country they like. It's very difficult to control them. Most of them pick Switzerland. And we have seen yesterday an excellent presentation about Switzerland. What is Switzerland doing? What is Switzerland imposing? They're not imposing a lot. So international sports federations benefit from large degrees of fiscal autonomy, organizational autonomy. We saw the principles in the Swiss Civil Code yesterday. They are not too many. They are not. Switzerland is not really imposing any organizational requirements other than you have to have statutes and some other minor things. So Switzerland could do a lot more. They do not do this. To their credit, they advanced their laws regarding prosecution of corruption. And that's, I think, a very, very positive step in the right direction. They should adapt a more proactive approach as well, I think, and look into how can we impose more robust organizational requirements. They're not doing this at the moment. Okay. Then, autonomy is a sacred principle. This is something most people do not realize, but International Sports Federation, the very construction of modern sport is rooted in classic liberalism, the concept of freedom of association. Somebody like Pierre de Coubertin, he said, the state, that's a dangerous figure. The state can only harm sports integrity. And this belief is still in the minds of the senior officials in international sports federations. They regard it as a sacred principle, as a cherished and sacred principle. They must be autonomous. You see that in their discourse. They're very good at promoting it. And you also see it in when you look at EU documents, for instance. You see it's always about the autonomy of sport. When you look at UN documents, it's about the autonomy of sport. So they're very proficient in promoting this idea of the autonomy of sport. Now, I am not against the autonomy of sport. Quite to the contrary, I even think that sport is not autonomous enough, in a sense. Because you see that in the past decade or so, sport is increasingly co-opted by politics. Many states, they want to organize sport events in order to enhance their prestige, their image, and they seek to exercise power over international sports federations, and you see some improper influence as well. You can consult the work of Jens Weinreich on this, who focused on the case of Russia in international sports. Now, what the problem is that autonomy should not imply shielding federations away from external scrutiny, and that is what's happening now. People don't realize that making international sports organizations accountable has nothing to do with interfering with their decision-making autonomy. Yeah? But sports organizations, they use this concept of the autonomy of sport as a passe-partout, as we say in Belgium, justifying their self-governance and shielding themselves away from external interference, shielding themselves away from accountability. So that was autonomy as a sacred principle. Finally, sport, definitely in Europe, has always been regarded as more of a cultural or a leisure activity rather than a business. In the US, that's totally different. There you have a different situation. Sport was regarded as a business from the beginning. But in Europe, where most international sports federations are based, there you see that we don't really regard, or for a long time we have not regarded sport as a business. We see it as cultural and leisure activity. And in Europe, culture and leisure activities for a very long time were simply not regulated. Why should they be? The end result is large degrees of autonomy, not enough external scrutiny. And this, we have seen in the Sport Governance Observer report, has had a negative impact on the quality of the governance of international sports federations. Something needs to change. And the question is then, who will provide this external scrutiny? And I've listed a number of actors. And I would just like to walk you through these actors very briefly. National public authorities. What can they do? What can a country like Belgium, for instance, my home country, what can they do? They cannot impose anything on international sports federations. Can they put pressure on them? Yeah, they can. But when they do, they can forget about hosting important events. They can forget about nationals having high functions in international sports federations. And also one thing that we do not realize often enough is that international sports governance, that's not part of the daily activities of a national government. They're not occupied with international sports governance. So national public authorities, can they do anything? Separately, I would say no. With the exception of Switzerland, of course, they cannot do anything. Commercial partners. We have heard Dick Pound in the opening session of Play the Game here on Sunday. He was talking about the IOC can perhaps take away some of the money that they disperse to international sports federations. Many sports federations rely on the fundings they get from the IOC. And this is what I would call the power of the purse. Yeah? The IOC could use this power of the purse more in order to impose stricter governance requirements. Are they doing this right now? No. They have done some commendable work, such as the publishing universal principles of good governance. They are not enforcing them. And I've just talked with somebody from the IOC, and she told me that, yes, they are thinking of doing something within the framework of the 2020 strategy. They don't really know what yet, but they will likely encourage sports federations, not impose anything. Sports fans. Without sports fans, you do not have commercial sports. They buy tickets, they buy subscriptions to media, and so on. So they have, in principle, a huge leverage to do something about corruption scandals. But sports fans are very, very difficult to organize. They are a very heterogeneous group, and we have not seen them having a big impact. And I do not think that in the next few years they will have a big impact. News media and journalists, okay, we have seen some beautiful investigative journalism presented here at Play the Game. And this has been very, very important, I think, to raise awareness about the mishaps that happen in international sports governance. But the media in general, I would say, is not that interested in the governance of international sports. They are more interested in what happens on the pitch, of course. That's where what their readers want to read. Yeah, they do not want to read about what's wrong in international sports governance. They want to read about what's happening on the pitch. So journalists, they want access, they want privileged access, and if you are too critical, of course, that may hurt your access to international sport events. So there's a problem there as well. Non-governmental organizations. We see that in global governance in general, non-governmental organizations have had a huge impact. For instance, think about environment. Non-governmental organizations, NGOs, in the field of environment have established great things. They have had an impact on the governance of multinational companies, made them more sustainable. So I think NGOs, there definitely is a role for them in international sports governance. However, we do not see too many of them at this moment. You are here at the Play the Game conference. Play the Game is a great organization, but how many people are working for Play the Game? Not that many. I mean, Transparency International now also has an interest in international sports governance, but I mean, there's definitely some work to do there. We should see more powerful NGOs. And then finally, this takes me to the two actors here, the EU and the Council of Europe. And these actors, I think, they may hold the key. Why? Well, for instance, the Council of Europe, intergovernmental organization, 47 member states. EPAS has, correct me if I'm wrong, 36 member states, something like that. And what can an intergovernmental organization do? They can coordinate national public authorities' actions. Yeah. Alone, I do not think that national public authorities stand a chance against powerful organizations such as FIFA. But ultimately, these organizations rely on political support. So, if you have a non-governmental organization that can bring coordination in the views of 47 member states, in the case of EPAS, 36 member states, I think that's a lot of potential. But we will hear about that later on. The EU, that's a special case. Why is that a special case? Well, that's because that's my field of research. That's my real field of research. I wrote my PhD thesis on the role of the EU in international sports governance. And let me allow, please, to plug two publications of mine here. I think my main views on this topic, on the limits and the opportunities of the EU to control international sports federations, they have been gathered in this article published in the Journal of European Public Policy. The EU controls FIFA and UEFA, principal agent perspective. And this summer I've spent all my summer writing this book on the EU in international sports governance, where I really elaborate what can the EU do, what can it not do, what are its limits, what are its opportunities, how can we see its role evolving in the future. This book will be published with Palgrave in the European Union in International Affairs series. It will be published, I think, in February. You can pre-order it right now. Enough publicity. Just briefly, what can the EU do? I'm not going to give a presentation of 20 minutes on the EU. I'm going to leave the EU expert talk about his own organization. But very, very briefly, just to give you an idea, what are the tools of the EU? Well, the EU can intervene via two means, I would say. EU law and EU sports policy. EU law, briefly. Many rules issued by international sports federations, they fall under the scope of EU law. Mainly EU free movement law and EU competition law. This means that international sports federations, even if they are based outside of the European Union, their rules must conform with EU law. They cannot breach EU law. We have two beautiful institutions responsible for enforcing EU law. That's the Court of Justice of the European Union and the European Commission. So that's one way. What we see is even though the Commission has the power to say, okay, Just to give you an example, FIFA, your transfer rules are breaching EU law. You must adjust them, or you must abolish them even. This tool, this very effective tool, does not give the EU the power to say you need to change your governance structures. There must be a connection with EU law. EU sports policy, on the other hand, when you use this, you can address any issue you want, basically. The EU can address the issue of the structures of international federations. The EU can use EU sports policy to ask federations to adjust their structures, but they cannot impose anything. So they cannot regulate international sports federations. What can they do then? Basically, to put it very black and white, they can just go to the federations and ask them, will you please change your structures? Will you please improve your structures? And then the question is, of course, why would these powerful organizations listen to the EU? The EU, just as a reminder, 28 member states. An organization such as FIFA, 209 members, more than the UN. So why would these powerful organizations listen to a regional actor such as the EU? The answer, you can find this in my research, but just in brief, sports federations, they fear EU law. They want to be good friends with the European Commission. And because they want to be good friends with the European Commission, because they fear that the Commission may one day say, your transfer rules breach EU law, for instance, because they want to be good friends with the European Commission, this gives the EU a lot of power. Sports federations listen to what the EU has to say, and the EU could really use this potential to steer international sports federations towards better governance. This is not happening right now. Why not? Sports policy is still in its infancy. On the other hand, member states are rather reluctant to see a big role for the EU in sports. Sports, that's a very sensitive issue connected with cultural aspects. And member states, they do not really want the EU to take up a strong role. But things are maybe changing. Secondly, and maybe most importantly, sports federations are very good at lobbying. This is an image from my book. I'm not going to explain it, but I just take it so that you can see what I mean here. When you look at the EU, there are two actors that can control FIFA and UEFA, because my research was based on FIFA and UEFA. That's the Court of Justice and that's the European Commission. What can FIFA and UEFA do about this? They can lobby the European Commission, this happens, but they can also lobby the member states and the European Parliament, because the member states and the European Parliament, they control the Commission. So you see that FIFA and UEFA, they lobby the Commission directly, but they also lobby the member states and European Parliament and are thus able to indirectly control the Commission. That's not to say that the Commission is completely lobbied or corrupt, not at all. This is just something that happens in every industry, of course, and lobbying is not something bad per se. Let me say this to be clear. The main point you can take from this is that I think the EU has a lot of potential. I think it will use its potential more in the near future. I think the Council of Europe has a lot of potential. I would hope that the Council of Europe would use its potential more in the future. Will they do this? Let's ask our panel here. And I would not like to ask the questions. I would like you all to ask questions to these two gentlemen. So please, if you have a question, raise your hand and yeah.
Hello, my name's Roland Jack from iTrust Sports. A question for George, perhaps. UEFA has a foundation for children, which was set up just a few months ago. It's got very close links with the EU. So there's Jose Manuel Barroso as the chair of the board, for example. Just wondered, could you tell us a little bit about the rules for EU engagement with UEFA and FIFA? Obviously, the restrictions And so how does the relationship work? So I guess UEFA have their own office in Brussels, for example.
Is it directed at me, the question?
No, sorry, it was meant more for George.
Yeah, please.
Sorry.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the question. About our relationship with UEFA and FIFA. Well, I think it's safe to say that we've got closer cooperation with UEFA than FIFA for obvious reasons. Our ex-president was got on very well with Michel Platini, so at that level, but also at working level. Just before Barroso retired, we set up a more official arrangement, if you like. It's very unofficial, but it's called an arrangement of cooperation, which just basically puts down in paper the types of things that we're going to be discussing with UEFA. It ensures that we have sort of regular dialogue, which would happen anyway, but it just kind of makes it a little bit more official without putting it into any particular special status. That was signed last year. So that's an example of the kinds of differences that we do have with UEFA compared to FIFA, which is a little bit of a different animal when it comes to our relationships with them. They're a global organization, so even if they're based in Europe, there's no particular reason why they would give us any more attention than they would to any other organization. As you know, we have expert groups, so the way that we have our dialogue with these partners is we have this dialogue with the member states and with the stakeholders, which includes UEFA, which includes FIFA, and includes many other partners, sports bodies, the IOC, Transparency International, FIFA Pro, etc., ECA. And we meet with them and we talk about specific issues to do with good governance. So without going into the details of the expert group, because then I'm asking another question which hasn't been answered yet, but you raised it already, what is the EU doing? So if you want me to elaborate a little bit, linking with UEFA and FIFA, but all the other parties. You're right. I mean, Arnout's already touched upon, we cannot enforce anything. I think we all know that. We don't have that right. We don't have the power to impose. We can only encourage, the same way as what you mentioned, that the IOC in their way of implementing their basic principles in good governance is to encourage the National Olympic Federations or committees to implement. And it'll be the same with us. But just to say, just now we're coming up to a very interesting phase, if you like, in our dialogue on good governance with the partners in Europe, in the sense that we've already established some principles. So we have our own EU principles in good governance, which were drawn up together with the member states and together with the stakeholders a couple of years ago. And now through this expert group, so through these meetings that we're going to have regularly, we were looking at the next phase of these good governance principles and how to actually implement what has been done and what would the next stages be. So this can and will the EDU more. In 6 months' time, I will be able to say a little bit better, how far we've taken this discussion forward. But certainly by the time it comes to the next Play the Game conference, then we should be in a different ballpark, if you like, because at the moment we've just got a set of principles, but now we keep talking about action. What are we actually going to do? And so rather than just talking about it, how to actually put these things into practice, put the principles into practice, how to get the sports governing bodies to implement good governance in the EU. These are all questions which we can still discuss, but we're coming up to a phase just now, just to say, where the theory sort of is getting replaced by more practical steps.
Yeah.
I'll leave it just now.
Maybe a follow-up question. Did the events surrounding FIFA change anything in the attitude of the Commission with regard to good governance? Did that provide maybe an impetus?
It moved it up the political agenda or in everyone's agenda, for sure. I would say my background is I've been in the sports unit for not very long, 18 months, and I deal with two aspects of integrity. I deal with match fixing and I deal with good governance. And up until the events which happened in May, it's safe to say that I was more inclined to be doing things on match fixing, and then suddenly you have a specific event which happened, and then good governance has taken off. So it was already on the agenda through the work that we're doing in the expert group. But now it's like looking at what else can we do, not just through the expert group, but what can the Commission do? It's not so much the EU, but what can we, the Commission, do?
And do you see that the member states are maybe asking you to do more about this now after the FIFA scandal? Or in your informal talks with member states, do you see that they are more inclined to give the EU a role in this?
I think to a certain extent we can say that that's true, but I mean the member states are always going to be reticent to pass over too much or give the impression that they're happy for the EU or the Commission to start taking too much initiative in a field of sport, which is like what you said, it's very it's very much want to hold on to that. So even in particular circumstances, there still has to be sort of taken with a little bit of caution.
Okay, thank you for that good answer, I think. Mr. Frossard, if I may ask you, just in general, you have laid out for us yesterday perfectly what you are doing with regard to good governance and the progress that your organization has made in the past few years, which is, I think, very important. But can you explain us, or maybe give us a little sight into the future about what the Council of Europe could do about good governance in international sports federations?
Okay, thank you. Well, I think that the topic of good governance in sport, including in international sport, it's definitively on our agenda, and there is a strong commitment from our member states to say we want to work on this within the Council of Europe. But not we at this stage we do not have a ready-made plan to implement this. But we have some considering, and we are trying to work on this. But it's sure that it will be the main topic of the upcoming ministerial meeting that will take place in 2016, next year. We are very much interested in the implementation of a good governance principle. For the time being, I mentioned it yesterday, there are different sets of good governance principles, those from the Council of Europe that were adopted back in 2005, very general. Then there are the universal principles of good governance by the IOC. There is the set of good governance principle by the EU. I think that it would be a progress to reach a consensus or an agreement on what are the principles of good governance we all want to implement together. For the time being, well, I thought that you were a bit severe in your assessment of the sports movement regarding using the principle of autonomy to reject any dialogue and cooperation with the public authorities, because the situation has changed tremendously since the last 15 years. And I think that on topics such as match fixing, we had very good and close cooperation with the sports movement, unlike what happened 20 years ago with anti-doping, for instance, where there was a strong competition between public authority on one side, sports movement on the other side, and each other's rejecting any competencies or reliability of the other partner. And now there is much stronger readiness of the sports movement to cooperate and address some issues together. However, on the specific issue of good governance of sport, sports movement is still a bit defensive and not that open-minded to discuss those issues, and that's an attitude that we should overcome. And it's maybe not necessary to adopt a new set of principles of good governance, but at some stage to discuss which are the difference between those principles of good governance by the EU, those which are taken into consideration, for instance, in your study, those of the Olympic movement, and to see whether there are some discrepancies, differences that should be discussed with the sports movement. And then I think that to support studies, indicators, measurement of the governance of sport is something very important. And I welcome the play the game study and your study indeed, and I think it would be very helpful to have that kind of studies measuring the implementation of good governance principle at national level, for instance. And I was expecting a project that Play the Game prepared to start. Unfortunately, it won't start in 2016, but maybe we will see whether we could do something or facilitate it. The Council of Europe has not much resources, but we would be very interested in because as I mentioned yesterday, we can play a role on supporting good practices and networking on the implementation of good governance at national level, because our member states, with their public authorities, the ministries in charge of sport, they have a grip on the sports movement at national level, and well, and they are all concerned by good governance in sport, and now it's time to mobilize them and to try to agree on what could be done together, and it will indirectly have an impact on the international sports federation, because international sports federation are made of people who are coming from the national sports movement, and if we manage to improve the culture, the habits, also the attitude of European delegates while sitting in the General Assembly of International Sports Federation, it will be good. Now, on direct impact towards the International Sports Federation, it's difficult. You saw that the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe took a stand and adopted a number of reports on this. I think that the ministers responsible for sport as well, but then we have some limitations due to a different geographic scope, the autonomy of sport, and all what you mentioned on this. But I think that it would be very important not to try to do it by ourselves, but to do it in network with all the stakeholders you mentioned, the press, the NGOs, the IOC, the sponsors, and together it will contribute to improve the situation. Now I'm also eager to listen to proposals from the audience, because we are searching what could be done.
Okay, and maybe just one follow-up question. You say yes, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, they have taken a strong stance against corruption in international sports. But in general, you would see that parliamentary assemblies, they have more freedom, more leeway than national governments. Yesterday we saw your questionnaire, of course, about what national governments think about good governance. But do you feel that there is a change of attitude going on now with national governments as well?
I think so, and well, it's not very earth-breaking, but the fact that now it's possible to handle that topic as main topic of a ministerial meeting, we have been trying for 2004 to do so, and it was never the right time. There was no political consensus, and now every member within the Council of Europe is supporting, say, this is the topic we need to address. So we are in practice, we are at the beginning of the process, but there is a readiness to discuss and work on this. And this very simple questionnaire, which was a screening of the starting initiative or ongoing initiative at national level, already shows that this is a matter of concern for the public authorities, and it will help to build on this and to try to federate these initiatives.
Okay, so Paterson, you wanted to make a comment?
Just to follow up a little bit on that, but also you mentioned it here, and it caught my attention when you said the media traditionally maybe haven't been interested in good governance because it's not such an exciting subject, or it can appear that way. But I do think there has been a big change, and I think because the whole FIFA thing, if it has done anything, it has moved good governance up, not just our agendas, but it's moved it up in all agendas, and there's much more public pressure, and like what we've seen from the event last night, outside pressure and the effects that can have. So when you bring all these actors together, then you can have an effect.
So we should be grateful for FIFA for bringing the topic on the agenda. Yes, question from the audience.
Hi, Catherine Ordway from La Trobe University in Melbourne, Australia. FIFA and probably 17, 18 other international federations are based in Switzerland, which suggests that the Swiss is probably the biggest player in this conversation. And I wondered, first of all, are they full members of the EU and the Council of Europe? And what buy-in do you have from the Swiss in the processes that you've outlined?
Wants to go first?
Okay, well, I can answer that Switzerland is a full member of the Council of Europe, and it's also a member of IPAS, and was quite involved in the process on good governance in sport and the fight against match fixing. Indeed, the first time we were able to address corruption in the governance of sport in a ministerial meeting, it was last year in the ministerial conference hosted by the Swiss authorities. And it's not, I don't see that the Swiss authority were ahead of the other countries on this, but due to the multiple scandals from international sports federations, they were under pressure of their parliament to take some measures, and therefore they started to move with this new law on private corruption, and to agree to put it on the agenda of the sports policy intergovernmental cooperation. Now I think that I don't know. I think the best would be to discuss with Willy, who is still here in this conference, on the opportunities to influence this through the Swiss authorities. But my understanding is that the law on association and the rather liberal attitude of the Swiss authorities regarding the freedom of association law requirement on this, it's not something specific to sport. It's something that is quite deeply rooted in the Swiss culture and legal tradition. And indeed, I followed the debate on the improvement of the private corruption law, and the main criticism, well, it was depicted as Lex FIFA. And I assume by FIFA itself to say, look, they are trying to shift the blame to FIFA and to make an ad hoc legislation. But I believe it was not the case, and it was more general move from the Swiss authorities to better address private corruption. Also following some recommendation from the Greco, which is a Council of Europe monitoring body on corruption. Yeah. And indeed, the main opposition on these legal changes came from the private industry, from the companies, and not from the sports movement. And there was a broad consultation, as always, when the Swiss authorities are preparing new legislation, new pieces of legislation, and it was supported by the, at least not opposed by the IOC, supported by the UEFA. Well, FIFA was against this, and it's public information because you can see the result of the consultation. But I would not say that there was a strong pressure from the international sports movement to reject it, and it's something that is connected with several other features of the Swiss culture and traditions. Yeah.
Thank you, George.
Well, nothing really much more to add. I mean, they're not members of the EU, of course, so we don't have any interaction with them in that sense. You know, they might be members of the Council of Europe, but not of the EU. I like the idea of your book and. You know, FIFA fearing the EU, or what does it say? The EU can control FIFA.
Steer FIFA.
Steer FIFA. I thought I saw the word control, which is an interesting concept. But there is a link, a kind of legal link in a sense when it comes to things like agents or intermediaries, as is now known. So whenever they are introducing new legislation or whenever there's changes in legislation, then we do have an effect. And it's also evident with UEFA, for example, because they have changes that they want to implement to the rules to the game, and they will come and consult with us. Platini came to speak to the new president, first of all, just as a visit because he's the new president, but also with a view to looking at, you know, to get some kind of initial ideas about, you know, what would happen if we changed the rules, specific rules concerning homegrown players, for example, and if they want to change that, you know, with the EU. It's already kind of laying the ground a little bit. So there is a certain influence. I mean, I wouldn't say a fear, but certainly they know that we can have a big say when it comes to internal market law and competition law, and we can we have some say there.
Okay. Back to the audience. Yeah. Here up front, please.
Will Vermegen, FIFPro. Well, just to follow up on the question about Switzerland and your introduction. And you also made the schedule with the European Court and the European Union on top. But in sports, especially in football, we have a mandatory dispute resolution system, and which ends up in CAS. And it is theoretically maybe possible to end up with the European Court. But what we see in FIFPro is that cases which are completely within the EU territory are decided on the grounds of Swiss law, which we think is very strange. And it's already been identified in the Visas report, where Mr. Visas says, well, we need a CAS chamber on EU territory to deal with this. And on the other hand, well, we also think that the fact that all those international organizations are based in Switzerland has a special reason. And well, maybe you can reflect on, I think it was Andrew Jennings saying that leaving Switzerland would be an act of good governance.
I'm no expert on the legal situation in Switzerland. I think you're the expert there, but of course there's reasons why they're there, and if you could ever get them to move, well, that would be a completely different situation. It's like with getting the European Parliament to move its base from Strasbourg back to Brussels. It's a lot of people want it, but how's it going to happen?
Yeah, but move international sports federations from Switzerland. Will that help? Where will you move them? What country will you choose? I think what we have seen in the past, at some point in the 1990s, I think Switzerland was going to impose a law, and in order to prevent this from happening, the IOC threatened to move through a different country, and this proved to be an effective means of controlling Switzerland. So you have to remember that international sports federations, they can basically pick any legal environment they like. They are global organizations, so they can base their activities anywhere they like. And I think that they would prefer to have a more liberal legal climate than to have a strict legal climate. So where would you like them to go?
Or at least within the EU, because of the connection with the European Commission and the EU law principles.
Yes, this would give the EU more power, more teeth, I think, but I do not think they will ever do this. You cannot oblige them to do this. Anyway, there are autonomous organizations in the end. Yeah.
Well, I can comment on the Court of Arbitration in Sport because, well, not in the light of the EU law, but we have some concerns about it due to a human rights requirement. And as a human rights organization promoting the European Convention on Human Rights, and as an organization involved in sports policies, we want to make sure that both systems are compatible. And we are at present working on two handbooks. One to raise awareness of the disciplinary bodies, ethics commission from the sports movement on the human rights requirements that are applicable even within the framework of a sports internal decision, and another to educate the public judges on how sports is organized and why there is an international sports movement and that kind of arbitration mechanisms, because sometimes we also have some unexpected decisions from courts which are just breaking may break the systems which has some coherence, but we are working on this. Regarding the situation of Switzerland, I think that due to bilateral agreements between Switzerland and the EU, there are a number of EU legal principles that are also applicable within Switzerland regarding the freedom of movement of the people and so on. Maybe it's not as if it were within the EU, but it's not an offshore territory regarding the euro. And I'm afraid that when the sports organization will consider leaving Switzerland, it will be for Qatar or that kind of countries where they would enjoy an even more liberal environment. And
Yes. Maybe as a follow-up to that, I think maybe your question was more directed towards the problem that we see that dispute resolution in sport is now taking place in these private dispute resolution bodies such as the Court of Arbitration for Sport, where sports law is applicable mainly and not, for instance, EU law. So by creating the Court of Arbitration for Sports, by delegating authority to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, you effectively keep dispute resolution from entering for instance, most importantly, the Court of Justice of the European Union. Because if you are a football player and you have a dispute, what will you choose? To litigate for 5 years until you have a decision at the Court of Justice of the EU, or go to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, where you have fast settlement at a reasonably low cost, but where sports law is applicable? Maybe that's more the problem you were referring to.
In fact, not really, because looking at the informal agreement in 2001 between the Commission, UEFA and FIFA, the new regulations, they have to be compatible or compliant with EU law. So this already implicates that if you accept the principles of EU law, that disputes also have to be decided on the guidelines, at least, of EU law. And what we see, not in all cases, because it differs with the Court of Arbitration, but sometimes we see cases which completely infringe the principles of EU law. So that's more or less the problem.
Mm-hmm. Okay, any other questions? Please don't feel confined to international sports. You can also ask questions about good governance in national sports organizations, of course. No more questions? Okay. Then maybe some final thoughts from the two panelists. Is there anything you would like to add to what you have already said, or anything you would like to highlight?
Well, I think it's going to be very interesting what happens in the next 6 months, 9 months, year, with everything that's happening in FIFA, with everything that's going on around about it, and discussions in good governance, and indeed the way that we're thinking about it, and the relationship between sports bodies and member states and international bodies. It's going to be a time for reflection. It's going to be a time for change, and so change is going to happen, and it has to be for the better, as our Australian friend said yesterday, and I remember. I mean, good governance is not going to cure everything by itself, but at least if you have good governance, then you have the foundations for dealing with all the other problems which are associated with corruption, with match fixing, with doping, etc. It's all those challenges that sport is facing need the foundations of good governance. And it'll be interesting to see how we manage to bring all the elements together, and how we can work together, looking at the various principles, identifying what are the main key principles, and how we can actually get the sports bodies to sign up to them, which is something that we want to try to do as well, to get them to make some kind of pledge towards good governance. We've got our ideas about how we want to do that, but again, we will see in the next 9 months to what extent we can do, because signing up and monitoring. It opens up a whole discussion about compliance and monitoring, and these are all other very difficult questions.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think we are, the message I would like to convey is that public authorities in the Council of Europe are in the starting block to address this issue of international governance. We in sport, we are aware of the limitations and the limited competence we have, and we need to act in a clever way, because, for instance, we need to have a strong consensus to take a stand as a Council of Europe toward external partners. I think that the work on supporting the governmental authorities to enforce good governance at national level is something that we will continue, as well as seeking dialogue and cooperation on these monitoring studies. You mentioned that the IOC is considering doing something, but there is nothing ongoing. I should point out that there is a project at present coordinated by the European Olympic Committees and funded by the Erasmus Plus project, which aims at setting up a self-assessment tool for the national sports movement on the implementation of the IOC good governance principles. And the aim of this self-assessment is then to guide them in setting up an action plan. And that kind of project, we are very interested in that kind of processes, and also whether it could be also used or extended to non-EU countries. And we will continue the discussions at a political level to see whether an harmonized position from the European countries could help. And I can imagine that regarding some legislative interference from international sports organization or pressure on countries which are willing to organize a major sports competition, we could develop a common position and resist to that kind of pressure, and it will be probably much easier to do it together than leaving countries alone against the pressures of the international sports organization. So that are some ideas that we have in consideration. I'm sorry not to have a much more precise action plan at this stage, but that's also the reason why we were very glad to do this cooperation with Play the Game and to come here. And I hope we will come back to Strasbourg with more ideas. Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, the conclusion. I think if there is anything positive we can get from these FIFA scandals, I think it's this: the autonomy of sports organizations, which was once a sacred principle, that's crumbling now. International sports federations, they also realize that they need to help, that they need to engage in a dialogue with public authorities, NGOs, and so on. And I too feel that there is a change coming here. Switzerland has amended its corruption laws, which is very positive. The IOC is thinking about doing something. We have seen some great journalism work. News media are now reporting more about governance issues. So the climate is changing. And these two actors have given us some very exciting ideas and exciting prospects for what they will do in the future. I've heard common position, I have heard about projects, I have heard about pledge boards. It will be very interesting to invite these two again to play the game in 2 years' time to see what has come out of this, and I'm very positive about what will come out of this. So thank you all very much for listening. Thanks to the two panelists here for their very, very interesting insights. I learned a lot. I hope you too have learned a lot. Thank you very much. Enjoy your lunch. Thank you. That was really, really interesting. I learned a lot. Both of you.
Well, it's not not impressive. You're kind to say that it was very exciting because we are bureaucrats.